so that the car.
Today I need to know whether we're going to be signing anything, and I need to know. I need to know if I can go to. If I can go to. If I have an invitation for the reception tonight, VIP reception. Otherwise, the driver has to take me to the wedding of
The nose.
exactly.
And this is the girl that
Will come.
from MOF, right?
Yeah.
I think they will have reception today and you must be invited.
Yeah, I'm just not sure I want to go, but if I don't have an invitation, that's an excuse to leave. So,
But you can go to the reception if it's
Then
early,
we're
then leave.
or vice versa.
Yeah, or vice versa.
Мой любимый канал. Можно говорить наш Наргиза, да, потому что я уже делал 2 раза интервью с ним. Вам да, нет, сегодня это Узрепорт и Мифт.
Дайте нам тоже маленькое интервью про нейросети, то есть про программу.
Наргиза есть мой программ, да. Один Джон работает с тобой.
So have you made a decision?
About which interview?
It's not on. You made a decision.
Next week I'm going to annual meeting. I'm going to Korea, I'll tell you when I come back.
Что в принципе, если он
See you in summer coming?
Yes,
Not this week.
I'll be there. Are you here on the 12th?
о чем будет идти речь?
May?
Без переводчика.
I'm coming on 15th and going
Yeah,
to.
because I'm doing a private sector client reception with our big shot in the new office. So I'm inviting. If you happen to be there, I'll get
Send me
you.
an invite, I'll try to make it. I will come 3 days early.
Yeah. Yeah, it's fine. Just text me so I remember. Because I think honestly, you're one of those people that I don't want to send a formal invitation. I want you to come,
Okay.
be part of it, right?
Okay.
I have two or three of them that I want to sneak in.
Okay, good. Sounds good.
Подождите, я сначала узнаю. Enrico, they say 2 minutes.
Sure as now or later?
А вы здесь будете до конца сессии? Мы же должны быть во всех сессиях. Мы должны отсюда.
No, because then your colleague is going to get upset because I didn't give it to them. No, let's do it следующий раз. Let's do it.
Давайте следующий раз. Мы просто с утра были в прямом эфире. И потом мы ждали тоже интервью.
So
Репорту дали.
I'm ready because please let's start. Otherwise, they keep asking me for interviews.
they said they said ask for 10 extra minutes because a lot of folks are still eating lunch.
Okay, fine.
So you have 10 minutes to do it.
Thanks for playing along.
I know. 10 push-ups. He's busy.
What is the name of the American is? What is his name?
Jason Chang. Chang.
Chong?
Chang, Jason.
Jason, I know.
Chong or Chang? I don't know. One of those. I always. No, because otherwise the other lady will.
Ну, он, наверное, на русском даст, да?
На русском, на узбекском.
А наша иностранка? Сможете перевести?
Нет, я не переводчик, я Абдуллаки.
Well, you can do it in Russian, right?
Okay, great. Okay, let's try that again. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. My name is Timothy Un. I am visiting here from San Francisco, California, and I'm very, very happy to be here. I love Uzbekistan. I was here back in 2017 and just very impressed by what has happened in this country. And I'm very honored to be invited here to moderate this session. I have a very distinguished group of panelists, and I wanted to go ahead and introduce them. And just wanted to start first here, and let me just walk through some of these panelists. And again, just to give you a quick introduction on myself, I'm not an economist, I'm in venture capital. So I've been investing in Silicon Valley for the last 13 years or so in various software-related, IT-related businesses. And previous to that, I worked at large global financial institutions in the mergers and acquisitions and capital raising side. So that's my background. And so let me get to the more important part, which is to introduce my very esteemed panelists here. To my left here is Dr. Abdullah Abdukadirov. He has a long, distinguished 40-year career in government in the private sector. He was responsible for reforms in Uzbekistan in the late 1990s regarding the securities market, tax policies, accounting regulations, and anti-monopoly laws. He is currently serving as the first Deputy Director General of the Strategic Reform Agency since December 2022. Some of his previous government roles include First Deputy Head of the Securities and Exchange Commission, the Deputy Minister of Finance, the Deputy Chairman of the State Taxation Committee. He's also served in the private sector, very distinguished career in the private sector as head of the Representative Office for Honeywell. He was a member of the Supervisory Board of the PJSB Infinity Bank and the Deputy GM for ABN AMRO, Uzbekistan. So very, very excited to have him here. To my right here is Mr. Nurbek Rayev. He is the CEO of iCapitalist, and it's Kazakhstan's largest investment loan crowdfunding platform, which has provided more than 9 billion KZT, about $21 million in US in funding for hundreds of growth SMEs since 2019. From 2002 to 2022, Mr. Rayev was also appointed as an independent expert for the European Commission, where he assessed and reviewed over 700 funding proposals. A long time ago, by the way, just to let you guys know, Nurbek and I went to business school at the University of Chicago together, so he's also a friend, just to let you know. But he was also, when I had met him earlier, he actually was the chairman of the National Innovation Fund of Kazakhstan, the first venture capital fund, government-supported venture capital fund in Kazakhstan. And he was responsible for the development of the technoparks and the venture capital market in Kazakhstan. He also served as the Vice Minister of Industry and Trade of Kazakhstan, was responsible for the development of the first five-year industrial plan. Since 2010, he has served in the private sector as the head of the private equity fund Fala Growth Partners, a $500 million USD fund, and later as head of Kazakhstan operations for Macquarie, Russia, and CIS Infrastructure Fund, which is $630 million in USD and AUM, one of the largest funds in the area. Over there, straight across from me, is Mr. Marco Montevelli, and he is currently the country manager for Uzbekistan for the World Bank. He's been at the World Bank since the mid-1990s and is a highly experienced economic development professional with more than 20 years of experience in Latin America, Africa, Europe, and Washington, D.C. And to my left there is Mr. Enrico Penali. He is the officer in charge, and I guess a lot of people know this as country manager, right, for the Uzbekistan resident mission for the Asian Development Bank. In his current role, Mr. Penali oversees ADB's work in Uzbekistan in the areas of finance and the private sector, including public-private partnerships. He has 18 years of professional experience, with the last 7 years at the ADB. Previously, he served as an investment officer at the Inter-American Development Bank, as a financial sector in the World Bank Group. So, could you guys please welcome me? Welcome my very esteemed guests. Okay, so let me give you a little sense of the agenda here, what we're going to do. All right, so this is a very interesting session on the risk of recession, and I know it's on the top of a lot of your minds. And so the way we're going to talk about it, I want to sort of go through this, is number one, is we're going to talk about how do we get here, right? And then also talking about from a global perspective, and then from a Central Asian perspective, and then from an Uzbekistan perspective. And I think this is a great group of folks to talk about that. And so we're going to get started. So I'm going to start with Mr. Marco Mattavelli. He just came back from the World Bank, IMF meetings, the annual meetings in Washington, D.C. So I'm going to let him set the table by talking about the global environment and where we are in the economic environment globally. I'm going to pass it over to you.
Thank you, Timothy, and good afternoon, everyone. So I'm in the uncomfortable position of speaking on behalf of economists here and about projections. I am someone that looks at these projections, but always with a grain of salt. Economists don't always, we don't always get it right. So I'm quoting now a World Economic Forum survey that was concluded in November, December, I think, this year, about the likelihood of a recession in 2023. And 2/3 of the chief economists said likely, and 1/3 said unlikely. So I'm here to say that the glass is not half full, the glass is 1/3 full at this stage when we look at 2023. And my visit to Washington during the spring meetings of the World Bank and IFI confirmed that. I think the level of concern and the level of discussion of risks to the short term, but also the medium term, definitely was higher than last year. The key message I got for the short-term prospects, which is 2023, is worse than last year with more risks, to sum it up. Now, when we look at the outlooks, the World Bank is forecasting at the global level, a growth of 2% in 2023, which is down from 3.1% last year. The IMF is a bit more optimistic, but it's their baseline forecast, the one that, everything stays stable, and they are at 2.8%, down from 3.4%. We look at emerging markets, and leaving aside China, we expect the emerging markets will drop 1 percentage point from 4 to 3 globally. If we look at this region that for us is Europe and Central Asia, we see a forecast more or less in line with last year, 1.2, 1.4. Not a very good forecast. I will stress that that is driven mostly by the Europe rather than the CA, Central Asia. So that's where the problem mostly are. What we notice is that investment and trade remain weak in 2023. Less than half of investments and 1/3 for trade of their rate during the 2010 average rate, the 2010-2019 period. So without those two, it's hard to see growth. But what is driving this? And I would claim, and this is what I heard there, that at least in the short term, there were 3 policy if this is a word, misdiagnoses by the big 3, US, China, and Europe. US mistake inflation increases as transitory, at least at the very beginning. So late start in monetary tightening and continuing with fiscal stimulus. One of the reasons behind the situation today. China, the COVID zero, sticking to vaccine nationalism, continuing the lockdowns, brought down the growth in that country. Europe, botching the energy transition, overestimating the speed of shifting to renewables, and realizing only through a conflict the high dependency on oil and fuel from Russia. Those 3 misdiagnoses contributed to the poor forecast that we have now in 2023, but also a change risk profile. And that affects the medium term. Now I would like to spend a few words on the medium term, the next 5 years. using the words of the IMF report, no soft landing with lower inflation and steady growth in the short term. Actually, the IMF forecasts, very slow growth increase, stabilizing around 3% over the next 5 years, and they classify this as their lowest medium-term forecast in decades. So not exactly optimist on that front. We, the World Bank, put into a single database 173 countries and look at potential growth. So we look at for economists, is the speed limit of the economy, the maximum growth rate at full employment and full capacity without increasing inflation. And we apply 9 different techniques. I will not bore you with those, but the outcomes was consistently showing a decline of growth prospects over the 5 years periods, even weaker if we get additional crisis in high income, middle income, and low income economies. And this is a source of concern, the synchronous challenges at all levels of economies. So this is what we are hearing. As I said, you could be with the 2/3 economists that think this, or the 1/3 that remain optimist, but definitely the level of concern is higher. What is driving this? Well, the risk profile that, we moved over the recent year from, we have a pandemic, and now we have inflation, but it's transitory, to, now inflation is sticking around, it's not transitory, to, we have a war and disruption in logistics and trade patterns, to now financial troubles. So all this continue to grow, the risk profile, and therefore the projection economists make are affected by this. On the positive, China is beginning to grow again, and that's always positive for emerging markets, particularly in this region as a major trading partner. Global headline inflation is slowing, but I will talk about core inflation that is slowing much more at a slower pace. For a country like Uzbekistan and other countries that are commodity exporters, there may be a silver lining in higher prices in the future of commodities. So these are some positive things, but going back to the risks, financial sector stress. If you read the newspaper today, we're talking again a West Coast bank in the US under stress, the First Republic, this would be the third. These things need to be kept under control because if they take hold or amplify, contagion could take hold, and this will weaken real economy prospects very, very quickly. So that's one risk and one key factor to continue to monitor. Debt levels are high around the world. Sovereign debt, and there are pockets of sovereign debt distress. So this limits the ability of fiscal policymakers to respond to the new crises, and the context remains the same, higher borrowing cost and lower growth. So it's another area of risk and concern. The war in Ukraine, we all wish it's going to be over now, but we don't know that, and it could prolong, and that may lead to more food and energy price spikes, which will push inflation again and another cycle of tight monetary policy. As I said, inflation is going down, but core inflation seems to be more, core inflation is the inflation without food and energy. It remains sticky, persistent. And this, again, it's a concern that may have an impact in the medium term. Finally, I would talk about this fragmentation of into geopolitical blocks. This is never good for global growth. It's never good even for country growths. It creates barriers, it creates output losses, it creates challenges for foreign direct investments and trade. So this is the scenario. What can be done? And I'll conclude. Well, the path for policymakers is narrow. Central bank have a narrow focus on keeping anti-inflation approach, but they need to be careful not to overdo it because otherwise you affect growth. Fiscal policy makers need to keep an eye on their fiscal to be, in good territory, but at the same time, they need to have enough resources to protect those struggling with cost of living crisis. They may need to have some resources for a bit of fiscal stimulus if crises continue. And when it comes to medium-term debt sustainability, this may require in some countries some fiscal consolidation, but also debt restructuring in some areas. What policies a country could look at to limit the impact on growth? Well, we think productivity, any policy that looks at productivity, attracting investment, we heard it in the president's speech this morning, labor supply, expanding your labor supplies, all these help counter all this negativity that I described. Address structural factors that block supply, increase the productivity, particularly in services, reduce trade cost. This is an important agenda in Central Asia. If we want to create more trade within the region, reduce those trade costs, support the investments, particularly climate-related investment, may be a good and smart recipe. And expanding your labor force supply, including by female labor force participation, another important element in emerging market and in Central Asia. Multilateral cooperation should continue, in our humble opinion. I represent a multilateral organization, particularly to creating global financial safety nets at this stage, and mitigating the cost of climate change and countering this geopolitical fragmentation that probably is not helpful in the end. I'll conclude. I know my colleagues will go more in detail on Central Asia and Uzbekistan. I would just say that we're not expecting a recession in Central Asia. We're expecting slower or plateauing growth. That's true. Inflation is expected to remain elevated. On the positive, I mentioned there is commodity prices may offer opportunities for Central Asia country, and the recovery of China, of course. On the negative, there is the spillover effects of the war. All these countries have migrants in Russia. So far, they have not returned, but the risk is always there. And I'll stop there and leave the floor to my colleagues. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So we're just setting the table for you guys. So at the end, we're going to be talking about some interesting things on top of the sort of the analysis that we're providing now. We're setting it up for that, okay? So next, I'm going to go to Nurbek Rayev, and I'm going to ask Mr. Rayev to talk about Kazakhstan, as he lives there and has lots of experience, and also as the largest small and medium-sized funding vehicle, talk about his on-the-ground experience in the largest economy in Central Asia. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and it's my pleasure to participate in this forum. Well, 2022 was a tough year for Kazakhstan. We observed all the trends of recessions. For example, the prices for natural resources rallied, helped us to soften a little bit the crisis situation. At the same time, we also faced the logistical challenges after this military conflict in the north between Russia and Ukraine. And in Kazakhstan in general, 2022, we faced two black swans in a row. So first one being the revolution in January, which followed by delays in payments, and this happened for several months afterwards, especially in small and medium enterprises. And second, the military conflict, as I mentioned earlier, the Kazakh businesses, they had to restructure the way we do business, because normally the goods were imported for Russia, simply because the Russian market is 10 times larger They had better discounts purchasing goods from Europe and China. After the conflict, Kazakhstan had to rebuild all these logistical supply networks from Europe and China. It took almost a year, but in the end of the day, the company have come out robust. They got better margins and better prices. At the same time, this conflict also affected the financial system. It was a similar story in Uzbekistan. The base rate went up. In Kazakhstan, it went to 16.75. In Uzbekistan, to 16. And then in Uzbekistan, end of the year, it went gradually to 14. In Kazakhstan, we still keep it at the higher level, which means that it remained unchanged since February, which means that the inflation is slowing down, but we don't really see the inflation being managed. So we expect the base rate and also the credits for businesses to be high until the end of the year. But at the same time, as I mentioned earlier, since we are in the second or third year of rally for natural resources prices, it helped us a lot because the FDI increased, and in the last year, Kazakhstan beat the record. In the last 10 years, it was the highest foreign investments coming into the area, but 75 of those went into oil and gas and mining sectors. Of course, there will be a spillover effect to other sectors of economy, and we should really work hard on trying to bring investments in non-extractive industries. But at the same time, this additional input of foreign currency, it brought the stability to tenge. We have a very positive outlook. Tenge stabilized because in March last year, the fluctuations were very high, and this instability caused really paralysis of the small and medium enterprises. What I think that bringing in investment, as Marco mentioned, is a challenge for both countries, Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan. And at the moment, each country is facing this challenge separately. I used to work as a vice minister, and we traveled to many countries discussing with different financial institutions and private equity funds to bring investments in Kazakhstan. But when they look at the economy, 20, 35 million is not enough for them to scale. When I worked for Macquarie, we raised a fund of $500 million US. But in the end of the day, they decided to leave the market because they said for Macquarie, the minimum size of a fund must be 1 billion. 500 is not enough. Which means that it makes sense for Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, businesses and also politicians, the governments, to consolidate efforts in attracting investments and position ourselves more like a region. Because when you look at the financial reports and investment reports, you always look at Europe, Middle East market, Latin America, etc. And the Central Asian market doesn't really exist. It is on the map of World Bank, for example, and Asian Development Bank, as Caucasus and Central Asia, but I think that the markets are different. Caucasus is different, Central Asia is very similar to each other. Therefore, I think that if both governments decide to unite forces and position the region as an 80 million population market, growing steadily, that could be very attractive for the investors. Both countries are complementary in the resources. Kazakhstan has the funding and natural resources, and Uzbekistan has a very good manpower, very professional, and also very good manufacturing. I think this is the right way to combat the forthcoming recession, because it's already happening. As you could see, the foreign governments, central banks are fighting the inflation, increasing the base rate. We're not really feeling it because we felt the pain last year, but we should really think ahead and try to approach this problem together. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Nurbek. So let me ask a few questions for Nabek and maybe give us, because he does have a business that does small business lending. Just from your perspective, you've done quite a few business lending deals over the last year or so. What does your credit appetite look like, and what condition are those companies that are coming to you right now? If you can talk a little bit about, sort of anecdotally through your platform, what does that look like in terms of credit and credit demand and your credit appetite?
Well, if you compare 22 and 23, in 22 there was a drop in demand for funding. Companies, stable companies which plan to return the money, they were very cautious of raising capital. And on our platform it dropped by 25%, and credit sector in Kazakhstan in general dropped by 20%. This year started quite well. I think in December, Moody's, they improved the ratings, investment rating of Kazakhstan, followed by S&P improving the ratings in March. And then ADB also improved the ratings that Kazakhstan is going to be positively growing in the nearest 3 to 5 years with a constant growth rate. On our platform, we also noticed that the activity is very high. For example, in April, we provided funding which is equal to 1/3. In 1 month alone, April, we provided funding of 1/3 of 2022. So we see that the activity is picking up, the trend is positive, and I hope that there will be a similar situation in Uzbekistan.
Got it. Thank you very much. Great. Next, I'm going to go to Mr. Enrico Pinali, as the OIC in Uzbekistan. Please give us your perspective, ADB's perspective on where we are right now, from an economic perspective in this country, where we came from and where we are right now.
Sure. Thanks, Timothy. Thank you for having me on this panel. I'd like to break the ice a little bit by also revealing that not only you and Nurbek studied together, but at least Marco and I went to the same school, although different years, and we only met actually in Uzbekistan. So, but we did actually went to the same faculty. So there's a bit of coincidence on these panelists today. So with that introduction, I think what maybe I would like to focus a little bit is the Uzbek experience in the last 3 years, really what brought us here, because I think we learned a few lessons, and really one point that I think is worth highlighting, that the fact that the country showed resilience is really due to, I will say, a mix of factors. Some are economic fundamentals of the economy, and some are expected behaviors that you have in this particular context. So I would like to maybe highlight 3 key major points. One, I think, has been touched upon already, which is the fact that the country resilience has been supported by the price and demand on the commodity exports, gold and copper in particular. Now, Marco already mentioned the silver lining maybe ahead of us, but in general, these remain the main contributors to export earning and remain the buffer against any adverse impact of external shocks on the economy. And so what we can see that these are still perceived as secure assets, and the price after the pandemic and the start of the international political turmoil, we actually went up. Again, refuge assets. So the favorable prices of this and the silver lining that possibly ahead of us that Marco mentioned represent a major asset of international reserve, which are allowing the country to secure that fiscal space that allows you to undertake counter-cyclical measures, maintain a stability of the exchange rate, and also assure a certain level of steady revenues from those SOE, especially the mining and quarrying throughout the crisis that we have experienced. Now, the other elements that I would like to highlight is the continuous expectation for capital investment. This country has sustained its growth for many years, traditionally, through robust capital investments. And so what happened, in our analysis is that this is really driven by the implementation of these public and private investment projects, as well as the upgrade of the industrial capacities. So as you saw from my profile, I have a soft spot for all the private sector activities, but in general, I will say that has now come to complement the growth. You heard the investors from Middle East, how much they're investing, and this is welcome because the country has opened up to not only public expenditure, but actually private capital. And this is despite the supply chain disruptions and this cost escalation that came about those two crises of 2020 and 2022. That leads me to the third point, which is exactly that cost escalations of factor on both of the input of productions and the consumer products. So again, on the demand side, we see the economic resilience and growth. We look at the expected shocks of this price escalation on the household income and the consumption. So in both these years of the crisis, we saw that promptly public sector intervention to control and cushion this impact of the inflation. Some of that was actually very targeted to foodstuff, but some was really also timely in terms of trade policy. For instance, exempting importers from custom duties, which help a lot in moderate the rate of already high rate of inflation. So not to self-publicize ourselves too much, and I can also say the World Bank has done the same, but both in 2020 and 2022, we help with large budget support operations the country to strengthen the fiscal buffer and to somehow have that margin for action that was urgent and that was extremely targeted to the most needed straight of the population. Sorry. So to mention a couple, one was to support the vulnerables with social protection measures, but not only vulnerable individuals, but also vulnerable enterprises. So we're looking at the SME and their activities and their capacity to stay alive and recover afterwards. And the other elements were the IFIs throughout those 2 years have supported was exactly the facing these increasing prices for essential foodstuff. And that was really to support the governments in targeting the subsidies to key commodities for the population to stabilize the prices and to assure uninterrupted supply and affordable supply. So I think some of these recipes are what we are still seeing in the market, and they will continue with this instability. But nevertheless, I subscribe what Marco said. There will be maybe a slowdown of the growth, but it will continue. Our latest publication, the Development Outlook, which also Norbert mentioned, have over 5% of growth. So it's not bad if you compare with other countries. So in general, there are risks. The recession, I agree with Marco, it's less likely in this part of the world. Nevertheless, there still are exogenous factors that can impact negatively. But also, I would say that the country has experienced 2 of them already. So they seem to be able to react promptly and intervene where needed without going overboard with certain measures. So I'll stop here, maybe, given that I think the next speaker will know even more than me on the country context. So thanks, Timothy.
Well, thank you. Just to let everyone know, if you've been reading anything from the ADB with regard to Uzbekistan's economic performance, all the way through the COVID crisis, as well as through the recent instabilities and exogenous shocks, that the ADB has kept the growth rates on positive in Uzbekistan. So I think it's very interesting to see that, and I think there's a lot of reasons, and we're going to double click into that a little bit. So thank you so much, Enrico, for describing it from the high-level perspective, and from that perspective, then I'm going to go to Dr. Abdullah Abdukadirov, and he's going to double click now and go into the details of what factors are shaping these expectations of growth and continued resilience in the Uzbek economy. So over to you.
Thank you, Tim. As Mr. Mastanavelli was describing, that the probability of recession is getting high and concerns are rising as well. The one thing is, yes, with this probability we have to react, and the major fiscal centers were reacting onto that by increasing the rates, by taking the measures on improving the banking practices, etc. But does that mean that all other developing countries has to react in the same manner? Because first of all, we have to identify in what terms this recession, if that is going to happen, is going to make an influence on Uzbek economy. That might be the first channel is foreign trade. But if you look at the figures, Uzbek foreign trade is increasing. Last year, 2021, it was 42 billion overall turnover. In 21 it was 42. In 22 it was 50 billion. And the export is also growing. The export last year, the size of export was over 19 billion. Another channel which might, again, this recession might has an input on Uzbek economy is just the capital flow. If you look at the capital flow, again, as Mr. President has described, last year we had a total inflow of the capital to the amount of 10.2 billion. So again, we can see here a more stable situation. And the third channel is the logistics. Logistics, yes, they were striking us, and it went to the situation when the profit on the export was eaten up by the logistic cost, which was increasing sharply. But now the situation is getting better, and if you see one of the largest routes on the sea between Shanghai and Los Angeles, the rates now the shipping companies are quoting is the same as it was in the middle of 2020. So this thing is getting settled, and the logistics are not going to be anymore the biggest threat for the time being. And then there are also good news concerning the Uzbek economy and the other performance in the region. As Nurbek was describing well, the Kazakhstan economy shows very significant and stable growth, and the same goes to Uzbek economy. If you look at the inflation figures, despite the whole spendings increase the last 2 years in 2021, 2022, we kept the inflation at the rate of around 12% per annum. And then the devaluation of the local currency was not sharp, and then we kept Uzbek Sum's exchange rate at a stable rate. Also, the foreign state debt, it was growing the last many years, but now it has stopped to grow. The major part of the debt had been paid out in 2022, and we are expecting that the overall size of the foreign debt is going to get decreased because we have started to pay most of that. But again, one thing is the probability of the recession, and the second thing is how you're going to react. As I said, it's not necessarily for Uzbek economies to react in the same manner as it was it was done by others. Let me show you, if you can put the slide, please. Okay, they can't. The thing is, the Uzbek government was very cautiously making its fiscal policy over the years. If you look at the comparison between the rates, the central bank refinancing rate, and the inflation rate, the central bank's inflation rate, the central bank's refinancing rate was a bit higher than the inflation rate even. Probably this is one of the rare countries where the rates were positive. They were not negative, despite many other countries. And then that leads to the second question is how the government is seeing these major fiscal problems. But as Mr. President has mentioned again, we are very keen to decrease the capital spendings and the spendings from the budget, overall the state spendings. We want to cut it and we want to increase it. At the same time, we want to give a good opportunity to grow to small and medium-sized enterprises. And having said that, we also have to say that we want to decrease significantly the role of the government, the role of the state in the economy through the privatization, through the digitalization, and fintech technologies, which is also the key element to change things. But as you have heard from the speech of President, there are 1,000 companies are going to be privatized in 2023, and 1,000 state assets will be offered in the market, and 40 companies are going to be presented at IPO market as well. This, of course, takes some time and it takes a lot of effort, but for us, for the Agency of Strategic Reforms, is most important is not making the IPO. It's more important for us to prepare the enterprises, state-owned enterprises, state-owned banks, for the process of IPO itself, because the efficiency, I mean, the fiscal efficiency, the financial efficiency, financial sustainability, operational efficiency, those are the key words which we want to perform with the state-owned enterprises and state-owned banks. Also, ESG requirements also will be implemented into those enterprises, including the corporate governance rules and the environmental and social care regulations. These are the major directions of reaction into the upcoming probability of the recession. But anyway, one of the good news again, this price for as Mr. Matavanelli was mentioning, that prices for commodities will be going up, which gives also some certainty in our policy that our foreign incomes will not be going down. But one thing also has been mentioned, that the state payments may be somehow will be affected badly because of the war in Ukraine. Our considerations is not like that. We see that because of many factors, the outflow from Uzbekistan to the other countries is getting more and more. The workflow, which was not needed, say, in Russia, Ukraine, or in Belarus, they went to the other European countries, even to UK. And the people were saying that some about 40,000 people were coming for seasonal work into UK. So that shows that the migrants are very active, and they are finding other ways to find usage of their labor. And from the other point, again, we see that transgovernmental transactions are getting increased by volumes. And we see that at least the Uzbekistan economies, the inflow to Uzbek economy from the migrants is not going to be less than it was in 2022. Those are good news, and that gives us some flexibility on reacting the upcoming probability of the recession. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, great. So I'm gonna summarize a few things, okay, and then we're gonna open it up for discussion, and I'm gonna ask some questions. What I'm hearing from these guys, and so I'm a venture capitalist, we're really good at summarizing. That's what we do, because we get 1,000 pitches a year. We have to summarize it, the pitch decks, and figure out what we want to do. So let me hear this is what I'm hearing. What I'm hearing is that Uzbekistan has actually been very conservative with its fiscal and monetary policy, right? So if you look at external debt to GDP, it's about 60%. That's considered fairly low. The United States is over 100%, Japan's 200%. So you're talking about a very sort of conservative handling of the economy by the Ministry of Finance and the President, right? Great, so number one. The second part is, what I'm hearing also is that if you listen to the ADB and the IMF and the World Bank, they're saying growth rate's still about 5%, right? So that's the base, is around 5%, maybe a little bit lower, but around 5%. So that ain't bad. When the United States is growing at 2.5%, lucky if we're 2.5%, and they're growing at 5% here. And what I'm hearing is also there's a lot of upside here, right? From number one, the reforms that are happening. So number one is the digitization. Come from Silicon Valley and in the private equity VC world, we know that when you go to companies and you provide analytics and automation via software, there's upside. And what I'm hearing is the banks that have been sort of old-style government banks are now in digitization and analytic mode. And there's upside there, correct? And then look at the demographics, and the demographics are good, right? So you're seeing growth, you're seeing a lot of folks under the age of 30, and so all of these factors tend to, for me, that the reforms, the conservativeness, is financial, fiscal, and monetary conservativeness, is sort of provides you the toolkit to be able to do things in case anything happens. Now let me throw this question out to the group, and feel free to answer. What are the risks to this model I just described? What are the risks? So you have fiscal and monetary conservativeness, good demographics, a lot of reforms that are producing economic returns quickly in the short and medium term. What are the risks to this 5%? Let me open it up to you guys. Feel free to answer.
I think one of the risks is we have to find a good balance between the growth and supporting the growth and supporting the prudent policy, fiscal policy. So that means, from the one hand, we have to spend more money to stimulate the growth of the economy, but the spending more money could mean that the supply chain is the same, but the money size is going to grow, and then it's going to lead to the high inflation. Then one of the biggest risks for the government of Uzbekistan is to find the right balance between the stimulating the growth and keeping the financial stability. That is going to be the biggest challenge for us. The second, as a lot of speakers were mentioning, yes, that's the influence of the war in Ukraine, but the bad side of that already had happened. We have passed through the bad sides of that, and this is just going to continue in one way or another. We don't see the huge risks for the economy of Uzbekistan, entire economy of Uzbekistan, because whatever, I mean, the logistics were increased, and we're getting lower, longer passing. But now we have found other ways. So we managed to diversify our logistics and our transportation ways. We have managed to make a good balance between the export and import. We still keep Russia remains as one of the biggest the trade partners of Uzbekistan. So, I mean, the bad side of that is already had happened, and it's not going to be really something which is going to ruin everything. So there is a still risk, but this risk, in my opinion, is not that high as it might be. But from the other hand, our biggest neighbor, China, is getting opened up, and this is a good sign as well. So, all in all, we don't see that there are some risks, but we don't see that it's going to be really kind of having a surprise for us.
Yeah, thank you. And I agree with Abdullah. Overall, I think, I mean, if we are talking about 2023, and in the short term, the risks are mostly from the international environment, largely speaking, to maintaining that growth. But I would like to go back to the fact that You know, Uzbekistan and President Mirziyoyev embarked on this transformation of the country in 2017, not so much because there was not growth. There was economic growth before, but this growth was, in a way, unsustainable because this was and still is one of the most energy-intensive economy per unit of GDP. So it's very hard to support the same level of growth if you look at from the resources perspective, energy. And the other, because of the demographics. It's a young country and you need to give jobs to people. So the risks, I think, in the medium term is to continue to move on making the economy less resource intensive and creating new and better jobs. Those new and better jobs, in my opinion, need to come from the private sector, from private investors. And that's another challenge, how to continue this transformation from an economy where the public sector, particularly SOEs, play a very dominant role, to one where there's much more space for private sector. Uzbekistan started all that, but it needs to continue it. And now it's becoming more difficult because advancing on that road with everything that is happening around us, it becomes more complicated. So those are, in my opinion, the
reform your economy. So I give you one example, but I can give you a few more after the discussion. So, for instance, I think what this country has done very well was to, as part of the reform process, to tap into the international bond market. There was an appetite for Uzbekistan. Euro bonds have been issued, oversubscribed. Now we see a financial storm coming here and there. What's happening in the US with the tightening of the rates and the risk on the financial system by some of these banks is not a very good environment to fundraise. You have competitive instruments, maybe some flight to quality. But at the same time, this country has a very, very untapped potential domestic capital market. Yes, there's a risk, but there's also an opportunity if you decide to go deeper and mobilize the cash that is in this country. There's cash in this country. There's liquidity. It's just not in the capital market. There's an opportunity. There's an opportunity to actually be ready to
over some of the stages of development. And I think this is a big mistake because you cannot really leapfrog the steps. You could just go through it with less losses. I think last time I was here in 2018, on the way back, I talked to local businessmen and I said, if you want to make good money, you should invest in construction of new houses because this will be booming for several years. And then there will be a credit crunch anyway, and many people will lose money. But in the meantime, you will be able to make money. So Kazakhstan basically followed all these mistakes. We got through all that pain, and I think Uzbekistan will also follow it. But what we did in Kazakhstan is that digitalization started more than 10 years ago. Like 14 years ago, we invested hundreds of millions US dollars into digitalization of everything, and all that helped us go through the pandemic very easily, because basically from pandemic, Kazakhstan went from paper money to no money at all. I don't remember when I used the paper money in Kazakhstan. And what it does, this helps, it actually helps the government to introduce transparency, tax collection, and introduce the tax systems and incentives, fiscal stimulus, in the way that could be beneficial for the economy. For example, last year, Kazakhstan introduced an experiment of retail tax. I think most of the service companies are in this gray, shady area when they don't show any profits. And in small and medium enterprises, we will see that there are no profits at all, although they're making money. So what the government did, they introduced an experiment when they canceled all the taxes and introduced just a flat retail tax. It was positive. They could see the accounts because everything is digital. And from 1st January of 2023, they introduced it, and it has become a permanent measure in fiscal system. I remember the discussions 10 years before when I used to work for the government. We were discussing how things could be done, but in reality, we were acting like a blind man, trying to see if that could work or that might not work. All these discussions were pretty theoretical. Now the government, with digitalization that has been done, operates with big data. So they analyze data, they can make certain samples, and based on the numbers, they can make right decisions. So I really like what Abdullah said about digitalization. But digitalization must be going everywhere, not only in private sector, but in government. And only this way, gradually, this will come to a certain result, but it will not be fast. It'll take years to overcome, but it is worth doing it. So I hope that you will not be thinking about leapfrogging, because in 2000, 2005, 2006, we also thought we could leapfrog, taking into account the best practices and consultants from abroad. It never worked. We went through all this pain in the last 20 years, and I think Uzbekistan could do the same, but softer.
Great.
Marcos, thank you very much for raising the very important issue about energy efficiency. And this is really one of the highest priorities for Uzbek government. And I'm sure within probably 10 days, you will see the decree issued by the president, which says several things on the tackling that issue on the energy efficiency side. One of the directions will be changing the tariff policy for huge consumers, which will be kind of penalized if they will be exceeding some rates of the consuming the energy. And the second, it's going to be energy audit system, which is going to be obligatory for huge consumers as well, etc. There are several actions to be taken by the government to put down the energy efficiency issue as the highest priority, from top to the down. Also, I would like to thank the raising the issue of the capital market. And as Mr. President has mentioned, that we are intent to privatize the 1,000 enterprises, but most of them will be, shares of which will be offered in the open market. But moreover, we would like to come back to the idea of people's IPO, whereby the people investment funds funded by people is going to be buying the shares in the open market, shares of the most liquid companies like mining companies, banks, etc., which are paying good level of dividends, because for the population is most important whether the companies are paying the dividends or not the sustainability even. Okay, the sustainability is an issue, but the second priority for the investors. But the first priority is whether this company pays dividends and the financial stability is there or not. So that's going to be done through the people's IPO, the investment funds, and then the capital market. We are expecting to make it around $2 billion size within 3 years, and our target is to make that 3% of the total population will be the player in the capital market. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to ask one last question, and this is slightly off topic, but I think it's very, from what I've seen here, a very, very important topic. One is the young people, demographics. So, as they say, in the long run, we're all dead, right? That's what economists say. But in the short, medium term, what can, in the United States and the West, small and medium-sized businesses drive employment and growth, right? What can Uzbekistan do in the near term, short and medium term, with regard to engaging the younger folks and in terms of supporting small and medium-sized businesses as an engine of growth? Let me leave that out to you guys, and then we can end with this question.
Marco tells me I have to start, so. I think there's a lot that can be done, but I think what we are also in this process of discussing strategic priorities of our work with the authorities here, and it comes out that as Abdullah rightly pointed out that I guess there's an intention to be a little more selective in the public investments, and definitely health and education comes out as the priority at this point. Now, focusing on the educational part for the young, one thing that there's a very strong appetite is what we call STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics. And that's something that we have been working for quite a while, and we hope we can actually help develop the curriculum, expand them nationwide, and bring technology closer to the young generation. My generation was Commodore 64 generation, I think. So this generation is really very technological savvy, and bringing the technology in the classrooms, bringing engineering principle early on, I think it will bring, it will increase the likelihood of employability of the young generation. So this is, I think, one of the recommendation I will put forward in this forum is please continue investing in education. You have a large upcoming young population that doesn't have to go overseas, but can actually fill up the high quality jobs that are coming to these foreign investors. If you ask these international investors what they're looking for engineers, they're looking for people that can operate these plants. And starting from introducing these elements of technology in the education will bring them, will have the supply meet the demand very soon after graduation.
I guess for SMEs, there are two questions should be very significant. The one is financial stability and safety as such, and the second is more or less acceptable taxes. As His Excellency was mentioning that this year, the value-added tax went down from 15% to 12%. We have started tax reforms in 2018 and continued in 2019, largely. And it came out together with the policy of the central bank by tackling the inflation. But now, with putting down the VAT at 12%, it brings more chances to SMEs to grow, because when we have introduced the VAT at 20% level, it became like a turnover tax. It was cutting a lot of jobs, and it was really bad experience for SMEs. But now it's getting back, and the SMEs are getting more and more adapted to that taxation policy. And the second, we've been spending a lot of money to support the newcomers in the market by providing young entrepreneurs special loans, especially in rural areas. We were trying to support the production of chickens. We were trying to support if someone was trying to have the cows, etc., etc. But now we were spending a good amount of money to support the economy, but the methodology or methods, what we were using was not that efficient. So we want to reconsider everything. We want to keep that supporting the quantitative support method of the economy, but using a different direction, more traditional institutions like bank institutions, which are highly concentrated on risk analysis, on the efficiency of each and every project to be financed, and these kind of things. And as I said, also bringing back the idea of people IPO, which is growing the capital market, which is giving a good chance for SMEs to have additional source of income, also is a good idea. It has to help to SMEs to have an additional source of investment incomes. Thank you.
Go ahead. No, I agree with all this intervention here. I think there is Uzbekistan indeed has a lot of entrepreneurship programs, and it should be recognized, particularly for young people, where I think we could collectively, I mean, also IFIs with the government, do more for is try to assess the impact of this collectively and see what works and what doesn't work. I think we are at the stage where it would be important to see what is the experience and how we scale it up. That's one thing. One of the challenge here is, at least I've seen statistics, there is a good entrepreneurial spirit. It's easy to go to small, but then to go to medium or large. So the growth is the challenge for the entrepreneur. And so looking at that in particular, what are the barriers to growth to move from small to medium and to large over a 5 years period? We have a good idea, but we need to probably think about more what to remove skills for young people. Enrico has already talked to that, and particularly in a double landlocked country, providing opportunity for either jumping the barriers of the landlock, which is digitalization, or providing support for access to export markets, etc. That's another way to help in this.
Great, thank you. So with that, I'd like to thank the panelists and thank the audience for being here. Thank you so much for coming, and that'll be the end of the session.
Thank you.